I still don't see the good sign with this administration as its impact to, at the very least, the near short term as it relates to the events industry, because a sort of America first and then there isn't any other countries unless maybe they're willing to be part of ours isn't anything that works in a global event industry.
Welcome to Production Value Matters. I'm your host, Matthew Byrne, and welcome to our monthly industry panel. Again, joining me this month is Nick Borelli from Zenith and Evan Babins from Scotiabank. Hey guys, how are you doing?
Good. How's it going this month?
Yeah, well, that's I think what we're all going to be talking about on this podcast episode. So we are going to start to tackle some of the challenges that are coming up for the events industry due to some geopolitical and trade policies that are coming from the current administration in the U.S. and the response that has happened. You know, it's certainly headlining news. I'm sure everybody's social media feed is filled with various bits and pieces of information that fly past them at a dizzying pace, to say the least. But what we want to specifically talk about on today's panel is how that's affecting the event market and ancillary industries, and specifically what actions can we take as event professionals to meet these challenges, because all sorts of things outside of our ability to affect directly right now, there are consequences to our industry, from things like we're seeing massive cancellations and reductions in travel, both consumer travel and business travel. I think we all saw Nicola Kastner's post last week, where she voiced some concerns, and she is certainly, as president and CEO of ELX, is trying to offer guidance to the industry. And look, it's just a reality as economies sort of butt heads the way they do. There is a knock-on effect. And what I said to Nicola in preparation of an episode, if you're a listener, please note that we are going to have a great conversation with Nicola on the podcast next month. So please stay tuned for that. But one of the things I said to her in preparation of that episode was, this feels familiar. After getting out of the pandemic and what happened to a massive circumstance that nobody had any control over, this is starting to feel the same. The word cancellation, reduction are coming up again. And, I'm sure that there are some people in the industry that are concerned about that. And how can we offer them some relief on that? So, Evan, what are your sort of initial thoughts?
So I'm going to be total devil's advocate on this one, because my roadmap is jam-packed. I have probably 150 events that are going to happen in this year, and we haven't heard anything about anything stopping, slowing down. We're doing stuff across Canada, the US, into Latin America, in Europe a little bit, and we're foot on the gas 100% nonstop. So in my world that I'm in now, I'm actually the anti this conversation, because I haven't heard any of that happening for us yet. I mean, maybe it's coming down the pipeline. I have no idea. But as far as I know, I was just on a briefing meeting yesterday with one of our teams where we were briefed on 13 events between now and the end of September. And so to me, it's large events, small events, medium events, multi-day conferences, single-day client-facing events, internally facing stuff. We're nonstop. So it's interesting that people like Nicola and a whole bunch of other people who responded back in her thread on that post. A lot of those people were saying the same kind of things, and I was kind of looking at that and being like, "Am I doing something wrong here? Am I the outsider? And are we in Toronto, in the Canadian market? Are we not sort of affected as much if we're not doing as much work in the US and other markets?" But then I looked at the other side of the thing and I was like, but my team is doing stuff in those markets, not as much as we do up here and up in Canada, but we're definitely in like Miami, Chicago, New York. This week we're in Dominican Republic. We're in London, England in a few months. Like there's stuff happening all over the world, and we're nonstop. So I don't know, Nick, as you like, is that the vibe that you're getting? Are you getting that like alignment with Nicola? Like what's happening? Like you're in the States, so.
Yeah, probably more alignment there than with you. I think that there's way more corners of the events industry than people give credit for. And I think most of the ones that are in their corners believe that their corner is the world. And if you're in the association bubble, you kind of think that's what events are. And in that world, it's so disproportionately around government. Associations, like they just rely on government backing in a lot of instances, and then nonprofits. So like if you drastically change the outlook for government and nonprofits, the association world suffers immensely. That's one. Two, events that are international in scope that just take place in the United States, those are also going to suffer. The ones that are probably going to be the most buffered are going to be non-domestic, not in the U.S. Events that are primarily based around attendees who are in that same area, just not as hit as hard. But the association world is really fearful right now, and again, I'm in that world a lot, and that world thinks that's the events world frequently. It's a lot of events. They're huge events. They're massive scale events. So the cancellation of an event with 6-figure attendees is a big deal. But this is, I think that how you deal with this might parallel COVID era tactics, but that's about it. I think that this is something that will, in this example, is a perfect example how it affects some groups but not others. I really think corporate can just keep their heads down, plow forward. The difference between one corporate's gains and their traction against another are so different. They may as well be different industries or different, things to look at, where most associations are lumped into the same buckets. Like it's a nice to have. It's and Matthew, you were, you can relate to this because you have been an association member. When things go bad, the first thing you do is you cut your spend as a small business in things like education and networking and what have you. So the associations are also feeling that sort of spending. Consumer spending in the U.S. is down. There are lots of job loss currently taking place in the airline industry in the U.S. So like a lot of the indicators for multinational events and also consumer behaviors they're not a lot of pluses. That's why I was like posting the other day on social media, and I was like, I'm going to be, in my world at least, one of the least political people. Like I'm super objective and, whatever. Like I just pivot to whatever environment I'm in. And I still don't see the good sign with this administration as its impact to, at the very least, the near short term as it relates to the events industry, because a sort of America first, and then there isn't any other countries unless maybe they're willing to be part of ours, isn't anything that works in a global event industry and like anything under the sort of umbrella of travel, tourism, and that kind of thing. So like if your events are tied at the hip to travel and tourism and hospitality, as opposed to a channel for marketing, I think that it seems like the sky is falling. If not, I think you can be pretty buffered against it as long as your industry isn't directly, like my gut is that certain manufacturing industries outside of the US are going to be like, what's going on? How are we going to do things? Like, so industry by industry, I think it's going to be really different.
Yeah, you've got a really fair point about that. And, certainly as you said, attached to travel, and maybe that's going to be the difference in the next little while. That to Evan's point, where a lot of, even if I can speculate, that a lot of the 150 events that you guys are doing are so matched to marketing and customer outreach, and not so dependent on the travel industry, as Nick just pointed out. And so, like, what do you think is the antidote to this retraction, if we can maybe call it that? Like, and specifically, what do we feel like shared experiences can do as a role beyond just sort of getting people in the room? And what can they play in rebuilding trust in business relationships right now?
I mean, the role of events in general is to bring people together. So on like the really, really high level, you're like, oh, we're the antidote to what is, currently taking place. I don't know how many mandates of organizations are really to do that, right? Like as a social good or whatever you could say. I want to do that, but like you'd have to be in servicing your internal stakeholders as well. So if there is alignment along that, then my feeling is there's a lot of misunderstanding. Or maybe that's nice. There's a lot of lack of complete understanding of what's going on. So I think that there's an opportunity for education and organizational. Like if you're in an authority position, I think now more than ever, dissemination of just the facts that are pertinent or real, that are filtered through the least political lens as possible, in order to provide understanding between groups where there seems to be the most amount of disinformation, might be prudent. And the delivery mechanisms for that could be beyond and probably have to be beyond the traditional in-person event, simply because if there's people on one side of the aisle and the aisle is a geographic divide, perhaps there is some energy leaning into digital that might be valuable. But like right now, there is an escalation of feelings associated with things that I never would have thought would be said out loud, let alone from the pulpit of government leadership. Like things that a year ago I would have laughed at as being like, well, that no serious person would talk about the acquisition of another country in that way, are very much getting gravity, like, and to the same degree that like the percentage of chuckles went from 95 to 99% to like 60. That's a huge jump between conversations I'm literally in the US, where people are like, I don't know, that kind of makes sense to me. And I'm like, wow, okay.
I'm going to try not to like motivate Evan and I to go elbows up in this conversation, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
Happy to do it. My brain can't comprehend any of that as being a real thing still. But there are serious people in serious rooms having serious conversations around this as an idea. And that is mind blowing to me. So if I'm a person who's like, what I really need is sanity, and I really need is understanding of like, hey, just because someone says something and they might not understand the implications or what would do, like that kind of information amongst our groups, if it's I don't know, an association of dentists, or if it was my constituent or my clients, right? We're like, hey, like this isn't something you need to stop spending money about. Like this is not going to happen. If that's the case, I don't even know. But I would want someone to be able to say, from our perspective, with our authority in our market, based on who we are and what we know, this is this and this is that. I think that at this point, clarity should be, instead of the sort of content like junk content, listicles. Like I think we should all go way in the opposite direction and go in like cold hard information, and probably stances at this point. I really think sitting on fences is going to be nearly impossible in all arenas.
Yeah. So I want to go back on something here, because just before the recording, we started talking about how, this kind of feels familiar. From an external circumstance like the pandemic, which forced shutdowns and isolation, and that really got me thinking: are we still dealing with the overall consequences of the COVID era? right? That everybody was isolated. And then in that isolation, people turned to screens and turned to isolationist content, right? Like screen addiction is up. You can see the consequences and not just in the United States, but across the globe. Certainly in Canada, I can say that we had some direct circumstances of that, of political and economic division, all of those kind of things. And I put that context to say, so if this feels familiar because it is almost a direct result of the COVID era, what role do we think that events can do? And the second part of this concept that I'm going to lay out here is that I think, and I posted a while ago about this, and I posted something else this morning, I think, about I think events can save the world. And because when you look at all of the things that want to divide us, whether or not you want to go back in history as far back as the 20s and 30s, where sharing, community, art, entertainment, all of these things were suppressed as a way to divide. And when I look at the circumstances that we see in the world globally and certainly acutely in some regions, that division is being encouraged. And so for somebody like Nicola to say, hey, I'm concerned, for me to say, look, I want to save the world, and I think events are the way. Like, how do we create those opportunities and those methodologies for event people to rise to these challenges? Is it about, and you just said this, Nick, about it's not about sitting on fences. It's about having a stance and getting out there, which is great. I saw a great post today from a very well-respected event planner talking about DEI. He literally, I think, kind of type screamed at everybody. He's like, well, I've been telling you this for years, kind of thing. And very valid point. But I'm not trying to get to say, like, are we picking sides, but how actively should we as an industry be in trying to encourage these events as a way to sort of destroy that divide between people? And in my opinion, it's always been about, well, I think you should spend more on events. I think you should do more events. I think the events should be more than just PowerPoints and screens and stuff. It should be about creating memorable experiences through art and expression and community building. Evan, what do you think?
So I think there's like two ways to look at this. There's like the tactile way of looking at it, and then there's like the non-physical way of looking at it. So I think on the tactical side, to Nick's point earlier, events bring people together. Events, we know, are what you use to network, to learn, to be educated, to all of these different things is what we know as like the target of what an event does for the attendees or for the audience. So I think it's about using that channel, as we know, as part of the, whether it's you look at it as part of your go-to-market strategy or your marketing mix or however you're looking at your events, but as a channel and as an execution like tactic to bring people together. Now, on the flip side, if we know there's problems with the airline industry, the hospitality industry, the travel industry, all these things that are potentially going to limit people coming together in person, to go back to the COVID era, it's like, okay, well, we know that digital events, we know that online events can work and have worked and did work for 2+ years when there was no in-person events. We know that we have the technology now that we didn't have in March of 2020 to some degree, because there was that technology that was existing in some companies that had it faster than others, obviously. But now that we've had this like mass surge of virtual event platforms and companies that exist, we can utilize those companies at a way quicker pace with way less knowledge barriers for the general event managers out there that we had in March of 2020. So I think it's about the two things we have to consider, obviously, is, are we having events that we're bringing people together in person to connect, to learn, to educate, to entertain, to just bring people together to talk off of the screen. If that's not available and if that's not possible because of all the issues with travel, and people are saying, okay, we want to go to events, but we don't want to spend money to go to events. We want to limit our travel budget, our hotel budget, our meal budget, but we still want to do events. We have the solve for that. We've proven the solve exists. So now it's like, do we leverage those muscles that we flexed during COVID, but actually have great events in a virtual capacity? So not just have a slide with a pip window with somebody's heads talking, but are we creating, TV level content because we have the studios that exist now that have been developed and have built and are set up for that? Like, are we creating like beautiful curated content that is mimicking closer to the in-person experience than we did in March of 2020, where you had a webcam and a ring light, and if you were lucky, you got a speaker that had a pair of AirPods. So I think there's sort of those two different ways of looking at it. I obviously am a believer in, like, you can never replicate 100% what you can do in person in an online world. I think we all agree with that. But if it's as bad as we think it is, or if it's getting as bad as we think it will get bad, then maybe it's using those muscles, using those tactics that we learned in COVID, that we've mastered since COVID, that we can now turn into broadcast quality content, versus we needed to get something out. So we had a PowerPoint presentation with a shitty webcam, and that was someone talking on screen. So I think that's kind of where we have to start looking at things from.
Kick back on that, because I think, look, that was a consequence of the only thing we could do to create connection. And then, to my earlier point, the consequence of that is that society as a whole has been it's gotten used to a certain sense of isolation, right? So like, if you look at the epidemic of loneliness across society, right? Like, where Scott Galloway's thing about young men are being radicalized more and more because they're the only thing that they get taught about being a good member of society comes from listening to podcasts, right? And not actually getting out and talking to other men, as an example. In the same way that, with the movements for and justified movements for women's place in workforce and networking groups, you can stay on the screen and have a call all you want, but like, until you get in a room, right, and actually form real connections and real memories and shared experiences, it's kind of meaningless. So where I caution, like, the idea, and Nick, you floated this before we recorded the episode, is like, hey, what's going to happen? Like, is virtual going to make a big surge again if all of this stuff happens? And my instinct is, I think we should fight against virtual taking a hold again. Because if we turn back into broadcast TV instead of what we do for a living, which is to bring people together, spark community, build relationships, all of those things, those can't necessarily be done on video calls and virtual events. Look, I'm a broadcast guy. Like, that's how I made my success during the pandemic, is I knew how to put together a broadcast of production. But it pales so much in comparison to, like, having the same content, the same entertainment, the same dynamic speakers in an environment that is designed to foster that connection. And so, should we be doubling down on that? Should we be going out to the world and saying, don't pull back your spending on these things, spend more, do invest more in this, because you're not, and this is where I keep coming back to this sentence, events will save the world. Because if the tactic is to, okay, everybody go off to your corner and let's share knowledge over video calls and video things, then aren't we just perpetuating what's driving this division? And so, should we be doubling down on on getting people in a room and giving them a shared experience.
We're saying things that are circling around different areas, and I think that like maybe that's the paradigm of what a virtual event has been. And this is where I'll start to say some things that will make people upset, and why virtual events totally failed after the pandemic. Like after no one needed to do them, after the gun was removed, to people's heads to have to do it, they were like, well, then I never want to do this again. And like I know a lot of people in virtual events are like, that's not true, and they like move the goalposts to absurd places. Like even that post that I was talking about, like I think virtual events have an opportunity to do something, in this world. Someone was like, oh, they never went away, and I'm like, let me guess, you work in a virtual events, because no one else is saying that but you people. They're dead. Hop in, RIP. Like it's not a real thing. And I think the word that you used, everyone used, that I think is not the deficit, and is the reason that I think that virtual events are things that aren't going to solve our problems right now, that would make things worse, is it's not about broadcasting. All the emphasis was on production value and broadcasting, because that's something as an event organizer you can control, and it's a tactic. But actually, the deficit was in strategy and understanding the behavior of what was missing. Now, what is missing those radicalized people on podcasts that events didn't get? That podcasts are doing great still post pandemic. Why are they doing it? Is it because of their quality? Is it because of their broadcast acumen? I don't think so. I think what they did is they doubled down on fostering belonging and participation, which is what our world is in desperate need of. And the medium of which participation and belonging can be something that we focus on. You could move the medium and still accomplish goals along those lines. So for me, it becomes down to, what are your mission, vision, and values? One, who are you? Two, what's missing? So if you have more dialogue with your constituents to say the events can save the world, I love that. Also, the world is in danger. How can we fix that? What can we provide you? So like the lack of ego to actually just ask our constituents, what do they need more of? How can we distribute it? And having the North Star not be about the platform and being somewhat agnostic to that, but having, okay, in this instance, based on these set of circumstances, based on our mission and what they're telling us they need, it seems like this is a virtual experience. Fine. How do we make this centered around belonging and participation? How do we ignore the rules that we were forced to do, that we were done during COVID, that didn't latch on? Honestly, we can say without a doubt those didn't work, because when we had an A/B test, we had no events, so we went virtual, and we had virtual, and we went back to having the ability to have live events, and people didn't stick to the virtual. So however it was done, when they tried it in that methodology, as soon as there was choice, they went the other direction. So I think that, like, while it got us through those years, it wasn't a paradigm shift because of the strategy of why we did it, and what decisions we're making were about quality of broadcast. And I'm not saying make them not have quality, but the North Star for decision making should be is this session that we're doing virtually, are we a fly on the wall? Is it just a camera that's really well done that's in this room? Or have we fostered the thing that they're saying that they're missing, which is the feeling of belonging and participation? I don't know if a lot of events did that. And I don't think it will be. I do agree that live events, it's just organic that you get participation and you get belonging. Honestly, not even all the time or very often at high levels in live events. But outside of a live events, it's extremely rare. But if we need to solve the world's problems, and we need to do it with bringing people together, I think we need a Swiss Army knife, and we need to know what we're about. And what we're about isn't about information dissemination. In the meantime, since COVID, we've got AI. I can get the answers to any question in my pocket immediately. I don't need you. I don't need your events. I don't need to watch a lecture. I can just get the 4 bullet points, precisely what I need, when I need it, in any voice I ever wanted. So it's not about the information. It's about the community. It's about the feelings. It's about change. And AI doesn't change how I think about things. It just gives me access to the data points. So if we get real high level and what's the world missing, what are we good at? And it's, I think, bringing people together, like was said, the belonging, the creating change, and leaning into emotion, vulnerability, and other human qualities. I just think that a lot of the lessons that were learned during COVID aren't really that valuable, other than the technical ones. Like before COVID, I had to tell people how to get on Skype and I had to walk them through it. Now people at least know how to log in. Like the technical hurdles are sort of like, you can make fun of people if they don't do it at this point. Um, Now it should be higher level. So if we're going into another environment of uncertainty, and people have a desire of something that's missing, and we're looking at events as the conduit to give them what is missing, I think we need to look at it and say, okay, now we're not at gunpoint. We don't have to do anything. We can do anything. What is the guiding principle of what we do and why we do it? And I think we didn't have that opportunity before. It was a pandemic. It was different.
You hit on something very important there, which is that participation and belonging. Again, I want to sort of reemphasize that I thoroughly believe that the only way you can create that participation and belonging is through live experiences and gatherings, right? And so that's where, as I see those sort of economic indicators of like business travel is going down and all the consumer spending and confidence and all of these kind of things, and certainly not just in the United States, it's happening globally as people try to figure out what's coming next. The antidote for that and the best positioning of that, either like financial, emotional, aspirational investment, has to go into events. And the way that I keep thinking about it is, there's this old thing that we used to say about attracting film and television investment in Canada, right? We would say that, Evan, maybe you've been exposed to this, but we used to talk about the guy from the studio in LA would be at LAX, and there are two gates. There's one to Vancouver and one to Toronto. And he would calculate in his head, how much money would I come back with, depending on which gate that I go in. So it caused, like in that industry, it caused a lot of sort of like back and forth tax incentives and so on and so on. But I think those who are in the business world, in the association world, in all of those milieus, as it were, are probably thinking, what is the most impact I can do? Like I got a big sack of money and I got two doors in front of me, to oversimplify it. And one of them is digital, online, more Google ads, more, virtual production stuff, like whatever it might be. And the other one is a live experience where I'm going to bring all of my customers, all of my stakeholders, all of the people I want to build community around together in a room somewhere. And I'm going to inform them, entertain them, and create shared experiences. And no matter the equation, to me, like it just seems instinctual to me to say, go in the live experience door. You will get so much more out of that. Evan, am I alone in that assessment?
No, I don't think so. I mean, like we've talked about, I think live events will always win. Like live events will always beat out virtual, with the one exception of if you have a capacity in your venue or in the room that you're doing your event, and your goal is to have an uncapped amount of audience, then your direction and your tactic should be an online version or an online option, so you can open up your net to beyond a capacity limit. And I'm a huge believer in that, and it has to be done for the right. I mean, to like quote a shitty line from The Bachelor, like you need to do things for the right reasons, right? And like we don't do things for the sake of doing them. We do them with purpose. We do them with strategy. We do them with data in mind. We don't just make a decision for the sake of making a decision. And so if your event needs to have 150,000 people at it, and your room that you have booked can only house 10,000 people, you have your direction. Like that's an easy answer. You have your 20,000 people in the room, and you have your virtual option. So you make it a hybrid event where you can have your extra 130,000 people that you need to hit your KPIs, to hit your benchmarks, to whatever you're looking to do. And so with that in mind, like, I think again, it comes back to like the strategy behind it, and like not making decisions based on feelings, and not making decisions based on, we did this last year when we didn't have any of these issues. So it worked last year, so we're going to do it again this year. Like, that's my biggest pet peeve in the industry, is when people say we're doing it this year because that's how we did it last year. Like, that's not an answer. It's never been an answer. It wasn't an answer before COVID, during COVID, after COVID. It's not a thing. Like, you need to do things with strategy, with direction, with a purpose. And so if you want to do, you can do, you're not implicated by the travel issues, all these issues that we're talking about, then yes, 100% in person, live experiences, connection where you can shake someone's hand or give someone a hug is always going to be the answer. But there's always the flip side. And the flip side, like Nick, you said earlier that virtual is dead. Like, I don't 100% believe that to be the case. I think virtual is a tactic that should be in your tool belt when you need to use it, and when it's applicable, and when it's the right active direction based on all the things that I just talked about. And so, is there a value for virtual? 1,000%. There will always be a value in a virtual, experience or event or whatever you want to call it. Is it the best way to connect with people in a one-to-one or one-to-many capacity? That's where the argument can be done, both sides of the coin there. But I don't agree that virtual is dead. What I would say to change sort of that line is, virtual should be used where applicable and where the strategy deems it to be applicable for. And so, like, that's where kind of my mind is. And like Matt, like, in up here in Canada, and especially in Toronto, like during COVID, like we had the most lockdown days of the entire world. And so it affected people in different ways. And, when people were going back and we were opening back up, it was like, there was anxiety, there was like, hesitation in the beginning. But then once everyone was like, okay, we're good with this, like we're happy, we're comfortable, we're ready to rock again, it's been foot on the gas. And I think that's where the difference is between us and Americans and events in the US is, like, we don't necessarily feel it to the same degree. When you have an event in Toronto, more often than not, people are local-ish to Toronto, or you're coming in from relatively close distances, unlike, the Vegas and the Orlandos and the Londons, and where you have long-distance travel. Generally speaking, there are people who obviously travel globally to come to Toronto for events, so I don't want to belittle that at all, because that's a big part of Canadian and Toronto's, tourism and attraction and everything else. And I'm always going to promote events in Toronto. I think everybody here should. But I think when you look at, in a city like Toronto for an event versus like a city like Vegas, Vegas is pulling from a different demographic, a different market, than a Toronto event does. So we don't have as much of a worry here in the short term, whereas maybe in the US, there's more short term, stress and headaches and potential. That's kind of where I see the balance and where we need to focus.
Do you guys think that there should be, and look, this is self promotional a little bit, as both, there are two elbow up Canadians on this thing. So Nick, don't feel bad about this.
I don't want to take someone's country. I don't know what to say anymore. Like, it's so, like,
Nick, you're not going to take over our country.
Yeah, no. You can immigrate anytime you want. We'll take you. We'll give you some maple syrup and a Canadian's jersey. It'll be great. So, as an industry, as a market, as things sort of shift and change in the U.S., and I think we've emphasized on this recording, the different perceptions that are happening. That, like, and it's interesting, Evan, that you were saying at the beginning of this recording, I don't think we're really slowing down. We're actually accelerating a little bit. And there's a Canadiana aspect to that. Whereas Nick, you're and Nicola are noticing stuff in the US I think there was something. I haven't checked this piece of information, so if it's absolutely wrong, it's just because I got a false piece of it. But somebody said something about $51 million worth of events being canceled.
I saw that number too. Um, I will say, do you know what city is the biggest city for associations in the United States? It's DC. That's where like all the industry around associations, like that's what takes me to either Arlington or DC, like at least once a quarter, maybe more. So all of that whole ecosystem is founded on that. So like if that's part of like your world, it's that. So $50 million is not that much.
I know it isn't that much, but my point is, so like, look, the actual story was South by Southwest, Canada House was canceled because of, stop calling us the 51st state and all that kind of stuff, which is, a thing. But, in tandem with that story was this statistic, was this piece of information through, I think it was Skift Meetings had mentioned it in one of their articles, that that they had heard from some association and a little bit government adjacent events, that it was something like $51 million worth of events were just like evaporated overnight, and canceled and stuff, which is set off a little bit of a warning sign. Predictably, I think that's not gonna that number is not going to go down anytime soon because of some choices that have to be made. So then my question is to the event professional that's listening, are there practical things, like, should we be looking at different markets? Should we be looking at Europe and Canada? Should we looking at, again, this is where I say yourself promotional, come to Canada. We're really nice people and we have nice, huge venues.
And your dollar spends more in Toronto, Canada than it does in the US.
And it's more stable. Like to me, that's the stability, right? Like the stuff that I'm saying out loud that we're talking about today, it seems so at the least politicized way I can say it, unstable, right? So like if I have an event and I want to take it somewhere and I'm like don't want to necessarily have it just being erased off of the map because we're no longer talking to these people or we're no longer saying these words anymore or whatever that I wouldn't think would be possible. I'm pretty sure life in Canada is right around now what it's going to be next year. In the US, I can say I have no idea. Like I have none. Like as someone who did 4 different DEI presentations to audiences last year, like I don't even know what we can say anymore. Like it's so absurd that I'm like looking desperately for like an anchor of reality. So yeah, like I if I were someone who was, again, I'm obviously not hosted by any DMOs or CVBs, I would look for stable in the next year and like make decisions for stability and then build on that. But like, it's very unstable.
And it's interesting that you say that because it's not. And I think event professionals listening to this should realize, like, because all of those cycles are in 3 to 4 year increments. The way that I personified it to somebody the other day is, I think that the decision making process has been stagnated, right? That it's stalled. And so, yes, it's very simple to say like, oh, well, $51 million US events got canceled. Let's move them up to Canada next week. That it can't happen that way. They're slow moving icebergs. But, if this kind of uncertainty persists for long enough, are we going to see that trend that, the XYZ organization who's been doing their event in Vegas for, the last 3 years has decided, you know what, for 2026 and 2027, we're going to London and we're going to Toronto. Do we think we're going to see that?
Well, you look at something like Event Tech Live, where they were in Vegas and they were in London, obviously. 2025, sorry, they canceled their event in Vegas. And the idea was they were moving, like the word on the street is they're moving to the East Coast in 2026 and in perpetuity and leaving the Vegas, sphere. Like, and I hate to use that, but like the Vegas ecosystem to go somewhere on the East Coast. So like, I think it's not even just like outside of the US, but you're also seeing that within the US markets as well too. Like there's been so many conversations I've had with people over the last number of months, on LinkedIn or not, where it's like, Julius put out a post a couple of months ago, like talking about, B level destinations and not your big 5 cities to do events in. And he was like, where would you have an event? And like, I was the first one to be like, Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, and then not only just Canadian cities, but like, I hate to call it, but like tier 2 or like B level American cities. Like when you look at events like in Texas, like normally people are like, we're going to Dallas and Austin, but it's like, what about Fort Worth? What about like there's San Antonio? Like there's so many other cities, even in the big markets, where you can do things and stretch your money so much farther that you just can't in New York, Vegas, Orlando, Nashville, like your big hubs, right? So I think that's like a huge thing. And it's like people don't want to go to Vegas. Like people don't want to go to Vegas. Like I mean, I don't know anybody who like if you're not a gambler who actually enjoys going to Vegas. You go to Vegas because you have to.
Yeah, true enough. But again, like in the case of Event Tech Live, that was announced like that rumors, the 2 years ago. Because again, like I get it. Like if you're putting in an event industry event in one of the biggest destinations,
Also a couple hundred people. It doesn't need Las Vegas. Like you could put that event in Jackson Hole and it could completely sustain that number of people, and your dollar would spend, and it would be something different than the sixth event you're going to have to go to in Vegas. It would stand out. So like to me, like I think that the scale, I mean, one of the things that I'm excited about with like a lot of like sourcing technology that exists now is actually making the right fit, as opposed to just going with something that you assume just can take care of anything. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty competitive out here. I don't think most markets in the U.S. think about the U.S. market. We don't really think about ourselves as a market. It's a bunch of competing markets. Like it's too big to think about. Like we want to bring events to the United States only at the real macro level, but everyone else, it's dog eat dog. Like there's I don't know, a PCMA event has like 50 different domestic DMOs and CVBs vying for people's attention in that thing. Like they cannibalize. It's pretty hardcore. But if I was looking at an event in the next couple of years, like I would look at like the political weather in the United States, like I would look at the weather in general, and I would say it's pretty stormy, and even the idea of like short-term things, it's like, yeah, but it's still a country that like got us to this point, like they're willing to go this far. So like on a level of like how stable is it to have an event here, it isn't. So that instability is enough to make wild swings economically and have lots of impact. And I think that like that's what's happening right now, is that you just don't know what's going to happen. And in events that are forecasted so far out and take in all these different constituents who are on both sides of any aisle, you want to be neutral ish or whatever. And like I don't know, like I think even having an event in the United States at some level is not even a neutral proposition anymore. Like I think it's a fairly, I mean, think about you in Canada. If you were a Canadian organization hosting, I mean, I guess you are, events in America, like it's semi-political at this point, right? Like there's a bit of that. I mean, some of it's required based on just the relationship, but yeah, it's I don't know. To me, diversify everything. Learn new skills. Try new things. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Be prepared. Have a plan B. We're really good at that in the events industry. But to me, the North Star stuff is the most. Like, have more conversations with your community. Ask them what they're missing, where they feel anxiety. Help them fill that in, because the emotional impact of like all of the screens and all of the political upheaval, like in every market, in every group, is just as they're still people. So like that's the way I would solve the world's events or problems with events, is I would have more two-way conversations with our communities and ask them, what do you need? How can we help? And not just give them the same things that you've always given them, because the world's not the same world.
Absolutely. So, unfortunately, we're going to wrap up the episode right there. Thank you, Nick and Evan, for joining me as usual on the podcast. And if you're listening and you would like to access more resources around the podcast, go to productionvaluematters.com and you can sign up there. And of course, on whatever platform you're on, it really helps us out if you leave a like or a rating, and you can always subscribe for more episodes on that platform. So Nick and Evan, thank you very much for joining us on Production Value Matters, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Production Value Matters, the business events podcast, is brought to you by Byrne Production Services. To learn more about Byrne Production Services and how we can achieve your business goals with meaningful event designs and elevated production value, head over to byrneproductionservices.com. For tailored AV consulting, check out theavadvisor.com, where you can book a free 15-minute consultation. Also, be sure to search for Production Value Matters, the business events podcast, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for listening.